live stream. I now hope it's working. So yes, I've been having some issues with this. So I'm glad that this is now working, which is good. Um, so that's a positive. I'm now hoping that you'll be able to see this very soon, and that it'll come up. And so I will definitely begin reacting very soon. As I wait for this to come up on. So yeah. So bear with me 1 second while I look to improve this. So yeah, that's what we have to do for now. As we go to this new link and start it. So I hope everyone's been doing well and everyone is having a good week. And as we start this reaction, which I am looking forward to, it's going to be good because I think we're going to learn a lot from this, and it's always one where if we're able to learn from, that would be always the way forward. So let me start this. And then we'll begin. Sorry about that. It seems like when you have technology troubles, we don't know what it is, so we're going to investigate into it. So it is a bit late as I start this. Normally I like to start these live streams a lot earlier, but it seems that there's other plans, and I apologize for the 42-minute delay on this. So I'm going to start it in a minute. I'm going to go straight into it. And where's my history? Okay, here we go. So what's interesting about this reaction is that we are looking at Angelo Delullo. He is a kind of a YouTube creator, I think, more so, and a spiritual teacher, I'm assuming, because he's on Awareness Explorers, which is one of my favorite podcasts. I've been listening to Awareness Explorers for around 2 or 3 years now. They are really great, and they are absolutely humble, which is what I really like about them. And so them interviewing Angelo was pretty perfect for me, because a lot of people wanted me to react to his videos. They wanted me to see what he was about and see if I agreed with some of the things that he said. So without further ado, I'm going to start this, and let's get to it. So let me share my screen. Okay, and we're going to do that. Okay, so we see. Okay, so if you have issues with the sound, let me know in the and let me know your views. This is an open forum, an open discussion which we'll have, and so yes, so let's get to it. Okay.
This is Awareness Explorers.
Well, welcome back, Awareness Explorers. We're very thrilled to have you here with a new guest explorer, Angelo Delullo. Hopefully I pronounced his name correctly. And
You got it.
I've been hearing a lot about Angelo, and I'll introduce him in a moment. But first, I am with my trusty co-host.
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And you've been reading Angelo's book, Brian, so I know you know a lot about him. I know very little about him. Between us, we'll have this covered. What's the first thing you can say that strikes you about Angelo's book or his teachings?
Oh, well, first, Awake, it's your turn. This book, it's become one of my top favorite books of all time. I mean, I just want to let our listeners know, definitely read this. I just love this book. As a matter of fact, I'd put it up on the shelf next to like Power of Now and Adyashanti's Emptiness Dancing.
And the other holy books like The Enlightenment Project, which somebody wrote.
Plus, anyone who would quote Walt Kelly, who's the creator of the Pogo comics, is a man after my own heart.
Well, let's give a little bio on Angelo. Angelo Delullo works as a full-time physician, and in his spare time works with people who are undergoing the process of awakening and deepening realization. These interactions began to occur organically about 15 years after his own awakening. And over time, this led to writing the book that Brian mentioned, Awake, to facilitate the process of awakening.
Before I begin, so yeah, this is interesting because I do think that the fact that Brian said that it was one of the best books that he's read, I now have kind of high hopes for this. So it's so I'm kind of intrigued to know more about Angelo.
Awakening people who are inclined in that way. And then he also developed a website, simplyalwaysawake.com, and a YouTube channel by the same name soon followed. And I know that Angelo is an anesthesiologist, as well as a pretty well-known teacher now of awakeness. And we want to welcome you to Awareness Explorers, Angelo.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'll start with a question just because I know that our listeners, some will know your work, some won't. But how did the awakening process happen in you? I mean, usually you don't think of a physician, they are very busy. So did this happen going to medical school, after medical school? What created this experience?
Oh, so it was before I even began pre-medical sort of undergrad training. Really, it was a path of suffering. I just grew up with a very intense internal experience of suffering. Something just felt wrong about the way I was processing life, the way life felt to me, the way people felt to me. I could pick up from other people that there was something, I don't know, inauthentic perhaps in the way people thought, the way people interacted. It felt like a lot of sort of ambivalence in the way people move through life. And as I grew up, I felt myself sort of picking that up empathically. Now, this is a way I'm describing it in retrospect. At the time, I couldn't have used those words necessarily. I mean, this started when I was like a child. But as I was growing older, I definitely felt more and more that there's something just did not feel right. It felt dysphoric, uncomfortable. And I would say by the time I was 15, 16, 17, I was interested in Eastern thought. I didn't have access to any kind of formal teachings or anything like that, but I was interested in sort of martial arts, didn't really know why. I remember finding the Tao Te Ching in a bookstore once, looking through it, and I would read it and just, I didn't understand it, but I knew there was something there. It just was so perplexing, the language. And I was a kid, so I was like learning to think myself, in logical ways and so forth. So it didn't make sense. But I just looked at it and I said, there's something here. I don't know what it is, but I didn't really know what to do with any of this. And the suffering just got more intense. Just kind of felt like a pressure cooker, to be honest. When I was about 18 or 19, I learned transcendental meditation from
Me too.
from an old hippie who learned it from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the 60s. And he just taught it on his own, essentially, not really with the TM programs per se. And he taught me to meditate, and that was the only sort of spiritual practice or of any kind I'd ever done. And so to me, that was like the right way to do it. It just made sense. It felt good. And I would say within a couple of months, I started having some pretty significant experiences, but I would now look back and call like a pre-taste of awakening. But I had no context for it. I had no one to explain what was happening, not even my teacher, really, although he resonated with it, and he was very pleased when I told him what I was experiencing for short times. But there was no instruction on what to do with it, how to go deeper, that actually this is starting to be a sort of sign approaching a portal, perhaps, of some sort. I didn't know any of that. I had no idea. So I just kept meditating. And because there was so much suffering and there was emotional repression and so much just internal angst, sort of super anxiety, I really took to meditation like someone in the desert takes to water. I always looked forward to it every day, did it a couple times a day, felt very good. Now, as anyone knows with meditation, though, there are times when it doesn't feel good, and it's kind of like hard to know what to do with that. But generally speaking, it was sort of my lifeline. It just felt really good. It felt right. And so I did that for a few years. And then
So interesting thing first, he was part of the TM structure. I wouldn't say he was part of the TM movement, but that's interesting. And the likes of apparently Delullo is from that TM movement, so it's pretty solid. But so far, really nice explanation, and I'm glad that he's talked about awakening not being a completely positive thing. That it can be pretty, painful and it can have suffering. It's not always, rosy and beautiful and blissful, as a lot of people like to think. Sometimes that gives an unrealistic kind of perception of what awakening can be like. Angelo is really cool. I think so far, I'm intrigued.
And then the event basically started to come into fruition. The conditions to bring this event about came into fruition. That was a complete dramatic shift out of anything I would have called what felt like normal life to me, or a normal self, or all of it just completely changed with that shift. And that was when I was 24. We can talk more about that if you're interested.
Question about that. I've been meditating, and a lot of people listening to this have done spiritual practice for a lot of years. What's your theory as to why this thing happened to you and it does not happen to most people in that way?
The handful of things I could kind of throw out there, and these are based on reflection on my own experience, but also just working with many people going through this process, that I would say are sort of that maybe the difference between someone who is really ready. I don't want to say that they can or can't, because anyone can. I'm certain of that, but that they're ready to, that they're ready to really just step off that edge or inquire in a way that is like burning all bridges, versus someone who's not quite there or not quite ready. So here's a handful of things that may come into play. One of them for me was, it was very obvious to me at some point that there is no way I could solve this deepest problem, this problem of suffering. There was no way I could solve that with thought. With thought, which actually was much more broad than just an occasional thought coming through your head. I knew that thought was everything I was perceiving, the way I was perceiving myself, the world, relationships, people, what I thought I wanted, what I thought would make me happy. I could see it was all fundamentally flawed at some point. And I guess I didn't blame it on anyone else per se, although I could see many people also operated that way, and I learned it from people. I took it inside and I said, I know I can't do this for myself. There's something intrinsic to the way I was perceiving the world, myself, et cetera, through thought that was flawed. I just knew it. So something in me was really ready to let go, and it's a sort of giving up or surrender. Adyashanti uses the word surrender a lot. It's a very good word. Not that I wanted to give up on life or myself even, but giving up on the insistence that I know how life needs to be for me, that I know how to make myself happy, that the way I perceive the world is the right way, is the way it actually is. I was willing to forego all of that and just let it all go because I realized it was flawed. I could feel it and I could see it. That's probably the most important component, I would say. Now, what's interesting is I notice, and I'm sure I went through this as well, but what I see with people who are on this path of awakening, they get more and more serious, in a sense, as they inquire, as they become more one-pointed about the shift itself. But it also happens through this happens life challenges and life experiences that show you again and again that, hey, this thing you thought you wanted that was going to make you happy, here, let's give it to you. Did it make you happy? Did it fundamentally make you happy? And that's the point where you have to, well, I don't know if you have to, you get to decide, am I going to be authentic with myself and realize it didn't make me happy? That relationship didn't make me happy. Whatever you thought you needed didn't make me happy, so it's not going to make me happy the next time or the next time or the next time. Now, it's a hard pill to swallow, but if you swallow that pill, that's a good thing when it comes to awakening, right? It's a terrible thing if you think you want to preserve your own idea about how you're going to make yourself happy. Then it's really bad. But it's great if you want to wake up and you're willing to really start to jump and let go and step off the edge and so forth. So seeing that the beliefs we have about what it is out there that's going to make us happy, which is a handful of things, right? It's money, security, validation, love, sex, a partner, perfect job, all of it, position, those sorts of things. Just seeing that really those are all surrogates for something. Those may give you temporary relief. They may give you temporary happiness. But they're not deeply satisfying fundamentally. And when you see that, again, you have the opportunity to just chase the next one, or just kind of conveniently forget that didn't really work. So or you can just see, oh shit, the whole system of seeking, the whole system of later when I get X, I'll be happy, is actually based on the fundamental perception right now that something's wrong with me. And it keeps underscoring that sense that something's wrong. So the whole seeking system that we really occupy a lot of our mind with throughout the day is failed. So then it kind of makes you go, well, where else do I look? Or what else am I going to look at? Where else can I look? You start to feel this funny, it's a simultaneous sense of sort of disappointment and letting go, and even grief, letting go of the old ways that you're thinking you've thought about yourself, and a kind of excitement, a sort of sublime, innocent fascination with, well, what the hell else could be here? Like, if I'm going to let go of everything I think I know about myself and the world and so forth, what's going to replace that, if anything? What does it feel like to walk directly into the mystery, into the mysterious? Yeah. Wow. So that's kind of another component. And I list a few things in my book that are sort of one-liners, but I think they're important. And one is I think a lot of people get into spirituality or they get interested in spirituality, spiritual groups, spiritual practices with a sort of mixed agenda. And part of it is authentic, and it really is what drives the awakening process. But part of it is a lie we tell ourselves. And that's that we're doing it to feel better. You're not going to feel better all the time when you're going through this process. In fact, you're going to feel worse sometimes. And so one of the one-liners I put in my book about this is be willing to be uncomfortable. If you're not willing to be uncomfortable in this process, you're going to, sooner or later, it'll just get co-opted with essentially a fear of the unknown, a fear of feeling uncomfortable, a fear of vulnerability. All of those things are going to come into play at some point. So
be willing to let go of being uncomfortable. That's a good one. It was really tough for me to switch him off like pause. Normally with videos, you kind of know where to pause. With him, I don't know if it's his pace or it's his just what he's saying is making sense. It's really good. I do really like what he's talking about authenticity. It's a big component of what I think as well, and so I'm glad to hear him say the same thing. I think yes, a lot of people think spirituality is always going to be beautiful and amazing, and there's gonna be no problems, and it's always gonna be it's always going to be an upward kind of progressive uh, journey, but it's really one of waves. There's times when you go up and you go down, you go up and down, and it's a mixture. So I think that was an interesting take. And Dimitri, you say, I think we are ultimately looking to feel better. I think that's legitimate. However, it's also true that we need to be willing to sit with discomfort. Yes, I mean, I do think spirituality, whenever someone wants to be spiritual, I think their intention is to feel better. Whatever they're going through in life right now isn't making them happy. So I think there's that. But I think the false narrative that a lot of mainstream gurus give is like, because they talk about their own so-called experiences, they make it sound like it's the best thing that's ever happened. And sometimes it's even better to, like, it's better than an orgasm, is like the way they try to talk about it. But the thing is, in spirituality, what I have found, and what i, I feel real genuine people have found, is that there is always a kind of, you just never know what's going to come knocking on the door that's going to hit you really, really hard, and just quickly put a mirror in front of you and show you that your ego is still active. There was a meme I saw earlier. I think our friend Matt Garrett had put it on his Instagram, and what it was a picture of, I think it was some seeker saying, "I want to let go of my ego," and basically it shows the person taking a leap forward, and what happens? The platform that he's on says ego, and he's taking a jump to let go of his ego. Instead, he lands on a lower platform, and it says spiritual ego. And I think that was a really good take. And I think people are like that. They think that, like, for example, someone may have like an experience that their chakras are aligned, or they had a kundalini experience. They have that. Nice, good, excellent stuff, nothing wrong with that. But then they start thinking they know everything, and they start thinking they've actually become enlightened, when enlightenment is not about whether you've had those experiences. It's about the underlying awareness and how aware you are of that, and whether that is more or less a continuous process of, or a continuum of awareness. Now, I'm not saying that even awakened or enlightened people are always aware. I don't think that's possible. I don't know. Um, what I can say is possible. The background is definitely there, but to say when they are in the midst of activity, I don't know. Um, I I'd be intrigued to know what they really happens. So yes, so that's a few things. The difference is sitting with discomfort with a sense of serenity. The mental is different. Yeah, I think what he's saying about thought is interesting. But yeah, let's see what Angela has to continue on saying. But I think for me, I'm kind of glad with the things that he said. He's got a very interesting setup in his home. And it seems like he's putting a lot of investment. So I'm kind of glad that, in a way, he has grown, because you can see that he's obviously invested into doing this stuff. Um, But yeah, so let's see what else he's gonna say.
The process of realization is really a mixed bag experientially in the moment. So there are going to be times when you're going to feel truly expansive and incredible mystical states and experiences will come here and there. And for some people, they come frequently. But you're also going to feel intense self-doubt at times. Not that that's new even. It's just becoming uncovered. It's being pulled to the surface. You're going to feel emotions that you didn't realize you had repressed. Anger. Anger is a big one, actually. But sadness, grief, and fear. So these shame, these are going to come to the surface. So being willing to actually feel these emotions just as they come, not get too entangled in them, not make a huge story about them, but just realizing that the part of this process really is kind of the dark night stuff that comes, the dark night of the soul. It's not one big long dark night of the soul, but you're going to have times where it feels like that. It feels like you're just so immersed in this sort of dysphoria and so forth that it can be disillusioning. But it also has to be that way because we're letting go of our orientation that we've been using, which is a cognitive or mental orientation that we've been using to make ourselves feel stable. But it's a pseudo stability. It's a stable dissociated state that humans are hypnotizing each other into constantly. And it's uncomfortable. It's fundamentally uncomfortable. This is Buddhism, right? First noble truth of Buddhism, life is suffering. So that's what that is. And when we start to deconstruct
analogy I've sometimes used for people is you're holding on to one trapeze.
I just really do find it funny when people say Buddhism. I don't know why, it always makes me laugh. Buddhism. It's just really funny.
Call it the material world and all those hopes. Well, you have to let go of that one to grab the next one. And somewhere in there, you're in midair, not holding anything.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And even I would even extend that analogy to say the nature of what it means to even grab onto that next trapeze is completely beyond you. It's something so beyond the framework and the scale of how the human perceives itself that it turns out to be very good news, but it really has to be sort of movement into the unknown. It just is. It's just that way. And that's a great analogy is like, yeah. So I would say some of those things, the willingness to feel uncomfortable at times, not to try to turn spirituality into something to try to make you feel good constantly, because it's not going to do that. Not when you're authentic about trying to wake up. Being willing to let go and being willing to see clearly that the things you're seeking to make yourself happy just aren't delivering the goods. So I think those probably are some of the important differences. And then another one that is one of the reasons I wrote the book is there's a lot of confusion. There's so much there's been an explosion in spiritual stuff and people and talks and videos and podcasts. I mean, it's just everywhere, and that's great. It's really awesome. But when it comes to authentic awakening, you really have to kind of pick through different things and try some things and be willing to let go of the things that aren't working, and until you start resonating more and more with a certain teaching or pointing, and then sometimes that will run its course, and you have to look around again and say, okay, I need to find a teacher who can point me farther, and it gets a little narrower as you go along. As you go up the map, it gets narrower and narrower until you find, a handful of people that are really, really good and clear and can point you in a very direct way and that sort of thing. So being willing to adjust, being flexible, being willing to let go of the attachment to a spiritual community sometimes is a big barrier for some people. It just is. Like they've been in this whatever community, a community of 1,000 people, and it's a very tight community, and there's even some dynamics in there where you're shamed for leaving or trying other teachings. That stuff is not so good when it comes to awakening. It's a very personal pathway, and social
talking
pressure.
About my personal experience there, Angelo. I was with a.
Okay, wow, like that was pretty good. I really liked what he said. That was actually pretty intense. Like about the spiritual community and staying with a particular teacher, and you should allow it to run its course and then move on and move forward. Yeah, and I think everyone has that inkling, but there is the comfort of being in the spiritual community. There are a lot of spiritual communities, and I have this problem with them, that they always say that they are the right ones, they are the only ones, and there is shame if you bring in other people's teachings. It's kind of like you somehow are lowering the standards of their community and their leadership. So I think it's what he has said so far, Angelo. I absolutely agree with him. I think there should be a time when you say and be open enough to say, you know what, this spiritual community or this teacher or this satsang as being good, but now's enough. Now I need to look further. I need to go beyond what I think is the. Uh, I need to go beyond what is being taught now, because whatever I've listened to or read or studied has come to an end. And I think, you know, it's it's crazy, but I think we go through many little deaths before the major death of the body. And I think this is one of those little mini deaths where we have to let go of a particular community, let go of a particular guru, let go of a particular method, or like even meditation. We have to let go of them. So I think that was an interesting take by Angelo. Pretty awesome. Um, so the satsang really did go off the rails there. If I look at the comments, hey said, nice to see you, Martin. So we've got some of our good friends back here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn my light on before I start again. So just bear with me 1 second. I swear I was a lot more prepared. It's when I had that trouble today. I'm now rethinking whether I want to stick with Restream and whether I should go to StreamYard. So yeah, I'm not too sure. If it happens again, I probably will go to StreamYard. But okay, so we'll go back to this. We'll listen to Jonathan and see what is next in terms of the teachings.
The community for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point I realized, I'm now using my spiritual community as a form of comfort.
Yeah.
And that's not,
Yeah.
It really is a discovery process, and leaving was challenging.
Mm-hmm. There you go. So, everyone's a little different. Some people tend that way. Other people are the opposite fixation. I don't need anyone. I don't need a teacher. I don't need a sangha. I want to do it all myself. I just want to read online and learn the steps and just do it. And
yeah, ego advaita or neo advaita, pseudo non-duality, just mentioned there by our friend Angelo.
Not ever go to retreats and not. So there's definitely a value to putting yourself in situations too where you're in prolonged retreat meditation and things like that. So if I could summarize the whole thing, it's a matter of what are your fixations, where are you fixating, and being able to inquire into and dissolve those fixations. Like that's how I work with people. I don't have a really method. I just feel where they're fixating in the moment, and then we address it directly. And I don't ever call it out and say this is wrong. I just say, what are you feeling here? Let's feel into it. Let's look at it, closer. Let's inquire and so forth. And then the fixation dissolves, and then a deepening happens, and then some emotional material comes to the surface, and then that's integrated, and then another fixation surfaces, and they become subtler and subtler as you wake up more, let's say, or as perceptual filters fall away, and you start experiencing reality in a more direct, spontaneous, integrated, intimate way.
Brian?
In your book, you make a distinction between awakening and liberation, and you also earlier mentioned about your experience. So I wanted to ask you if you could sort of elucidate the difference between those, and maybe if you feel like throwing in any of your personal experience along the way, that'd be great too.
Yeah. So when I say awakening, I really mean the first significant and very real shift in identity. It can happen sort of slowly, but it generally is, generally speaking, it's pretty obvious the moment it happens. Sometimes that comes with a tremendous emotional release and a very like almost like an earth shattering change in the way you perceive everything. And other times it's more like, oh, I was expecting these big fireworks. There's no fireworks, but something damn well changed about the way I experience myself in the world. And that doesn't change back. So that's what I mean by awakening. And in the book, I unpack that a lot. In Zen, Renzai Zen, or even Soto Zen, it'd be called Kensho, or perhaps Satori, or stream entry if you're going way back to the suttas and whatever. So that's the first awakening or initial shift. It really is, at least in Buddhist terminology, would be your spiritual birth. It's really the beginning. It's a significant, profound, and important shift, and you know it. And it kind of defines, in a sense, your spiritual life, I guess you could say. But experientially, it's a big shift in the way things are perceived. What's interesting is after that, it feels a lot less like you're in control of the whole spiritual journey. There's another dimension that just came in. Call it Holy Spirit, call it the Buddha Dharma. I mean, it doesn't matter, but there's something else moving everything. I kind of know that. Now, the worst thing you can do at that point is fight that and decide, no, I'm going to control this. I'm going to decide where my spiritual journey goes. I'm going to be the guru. I'm going to define my life this way and that way. And that can really lead to some bad situations.
I like that. I think that's pretty true as well. I mean, I would refer to that as grace, and I think you should let grace or goodbye work its own way. You should let it be as it should do. Let it take you where you need to be taken. So I do agree with that. And I do find that the more times I've progressed spiritually has been less from my own personal efforts and more of what he's been referring to as letting go. So I do agree with him.
Situations actually, almost like cult-like behavior in the extreme. And there are contemporary people out there today who've done that. And so you got to be really careful after that first awakening. You're just at the beginning. In Zen, they would say your foot's in the door. You got the door cracked open, but you're not in the room yet. I mean, there's a lot of work to do. What's interesting is some of the repressed material that really becomes the most important, let's say, thing to address after that awakening is something that you'll want to often overlook, but it actually can become more pronounced in your life. And this can be obvious to people around you more than it is to you sometimes. And it's really about like reactivity, control. Some people kind of turn into more of a jerk after awakening for a while because the layers of inauthentic identity that was sort of holding it down are kind of dissolved away. And then the deeper not necessarily inauthenticity, but the deeper, let's say, anger that's wrapped around the persona that we're identified with in the deeper emotion body, that now comes to the surface, and there's less of a governing tendency. There's less of a holding back because we're like in this place where we trust life now in a deeper way. And yet part of that is really hard to swallow. We realize like, oh man, underneath a lot of this nice guy stuff, I wasn't such a nice guy. I had a lot of anger. I had whatever, right? So it starts to express itself. So I wouldn't say it's a dangerous time, but it's a potential time for things to go wrong. And as I described, you can sort of try to co-opt the whole process for your own ends in a way. Like the ego can almost become stronger in a certain way for a while. The best thing you can do at that point is to become humble, to find a teacher that's going to keep you in line, or that will be honest with you and direct with you. Not an abusive teacher, but someone who will be really authentic with you and really show you how to start working through the emotion stuff, the shadow stuff, reactivity. That's the best thing you can do at that point. The worst thing you can do is decide you're enlightened and go out and decide to start a huge, massive sangha and start marketing it and all that. That can turn really ugly, actually. So anyway, so awakening is sort of the beginning. That's how I define it. Liberation, in the way I use the term, could be equated to would be call it enlightenment, maybe traditionally, although there's different meanings of enlightenment in the different traditions. But essentially, it would be enlightenment, is a much more profound, subtle, and thorough realization. It's quite thoroughgoing. And so I would say that I would probably not call someone liberated until they have truly realized, fully realized and integrated no self or anatta in all aspects. So that's how I would define liberation.
Yeah, everything there, I agree with. Nothing there that I disagree with. Pretty much really good and on point, which is why I think Jonathan and Brian are just so calm, allow the guests to just express themselves. So yeah, really interesting so far.
Liberation from suffering, but liberation from suffering is liberation from the illusion of a separate, abiding, suffering self. Also, liberation from the illusion that there's anything that's permanent or that there's anything that's impermanent. The illusion of solidity, the illusion of time and space, those are all gone by the time I would say you're actually liberated. So there's a few important shifts, significant shifts in perception that occur in deeper stage realization. This is not very common, to be honest. I mean, there are liberated people alive today who teach, but it's not super common compared to how many people there are talking about awakening in an authentic way who've had awakenings, and definitely not compared to just the wider spiritual world. Doesn't mean it's elitist, and it doesn't mean it's impossible. I wouldn't even open my mouth to start talking about this or write the book until I knew that there was a way for anyone who's really, really dedicated to it to do it. And I'm convinced of that.
And
So from what I see, Angelo, he's quite adamant that someone needs to be really determined and really sincere. That says a lot about him as well as a person, that he doesn't really want this whole thing about being. I think for him, he just wants to make sure that the person really wants to be liberated or wants to have freedom, and it's not necessarily just another activity they add to their life by pretending to want to be this spiritual kind of artist of some kind or seeker of some kind. So yeah, very interesting. I'm quite surprised. I never thought I would be agreeing until, like, I thought there'd be a time when I would probably even disagree with him on some points. But so far, so good. I don't know if it's too good to be true. I don't know. I hope that the pseudo non-duality has not infested into my brain where I cannot see authenticity. But jokes aside, I can see that he's an authentic person just by the things that he's been saying about the spiritual community, about why it's important to, be honest about where you are and not pretend to be anything other than what you say you are. So I think I'm with him on that.
also, I mean, naturally, people are going to say, okay, this is great, this no self thing. How do I do that? In other words, they're going to create a self that does that. But you had a video that really was, I think, profound, was called The Paradox of No Self. And you wrote, or you say in that, after de-identifying from thought, there's something else that's easy to overlook. The thinker itself is also a thought, just like those are thoughts. The thinker itself is a thought. And that seemed to open a whole new door, that this whole idea of ourselves is just another thing that appears along with everything else in the vast sort of undefinable, no qualities field of beingness, or whatever you want to call it.
That's well said. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and that's the real that's what I would say, the realization of no self in and as consciousness. Now, believe it or not, this realization actually goes beyond that. It's very difficult to talk about how that is, but it's also very natural. Just like every step of the way, it feels more natural than everything you were perceiving before. It's very common. I hear people say after the initial awakening, something along the lines of, "Oh, I remember this. I remember this from childhood, but it wasn't a memory. It was before I was thinking." Or even before, almost like before childhood or infancy. I remember this, but it's not a thought. It's not a belief. It's not a perception of the way things are, the way I am. It's fundamental to all of that. It's pure being. I think a term in Dzogchen is like knowingness. It's a nice term. None of these terms are perfect because any of these terms can easily be turned into another thought. As long as that perception that I am a thinker is there. What's interesting about this, and you brought up the idea of being the thinker, or the thinker itself is a thought. What's interesting about that is this: the hardest things to uproot, you could say, are things that are behind the view. Whatever's in front of the view, at least you can become aware that that's an object of experience. So a thought, you can become identified with thoughts, right? You can be sitting in the world of my boss and this, and like imagining what's happening and the conversation you're going to have. And all of a sudden you realize, whoa. No, I'm sitting here in this room. My boss isn't here. Those are thoughts, right? That's to de-identify from a thought. Then you realize the thought is an object. Okay. But that's in front of the view. The view that feels like you, that's the thinker still being not recognized as a thought. You can de-identify from that. That's what awakening is. That's what Kensho is. And it happens like in a second. And it's a trip, like really surprises people usually. Again, even if it's not a big explosion of fireworks or anything, it's surprising. It's just a blip that's so strange and so natural and so obvious. Like, how did I not see this? One analogy I like to use. Go ahead.
It's a different world, as you
different
said.
World. Yeah.
So I'm actually really impressed by everything he just said. And I can relate to that. I can really relate to what he said. Definitely about the thinker. And yeah, I don't know if we have a different a definition for awareness or consciousness. I want to see what he says about that more. But yeah, so far, very interesting person. Definitely not a pseudo non-dualist right now, looking at it. But yeah, I sent you some of his vids earlier on. His style and delivery resonates deeply with me. It might not be everyone else's cup of tea, but my apparent eye certainly enjoys it. Well, I'm glad that your apparent eye does enjoy it. But I do agree with you, Martin. Yeah, you did send me his videos, and someone else did as well. Someone else wanted me to do a reaction to him. But yeah, everything he's said so far, there's a reason why I've not been pausing, because I'm just taking in what he's saying more and more. Yeah, let's see where else this takes us.
Yeah.
Another analogy I like to use is like, you could imagine your life, let's say up to this point or whatever, you've been looking through a knot hole in the fence, right? And the knot hole is like your perceptual filters. That's how your mind and your experience and your proclivities put together how you perceive the world, right? Whether it's good or bad, whether you're good or bad, whether people are nice or not, whether, all the opinions and all the filters we put over the world. But that hole in the fence you're looking through, that's the collection of perceptual filters, let's say. That's your lens on the world. That's your eyes, ears, nose, whatever. As you grow and learn and have new experiences and meet new people, you tend to sort of see different things on the other side of that fence, depending on where you're looking. And even the hole can kind of change, right? It can become bigger, the lens can clarify. So everything on the other side of that fence, all the different experiences or perceptions or ways of perceiving or paradigms, those are kind of like, as you grow and learn and hopefully mature, that's what's changing, is the other side of the fence. Awakening is like someone pushes your head out of the way and something else is looking through that hole from this side. And it's like the universe. It's that different. It's so hard to talk about how that could be, how that would be. And then again, it's like the analogy even breaks down. You're almost looking from both sides of the hole at the same time. And it's just like endless consciousness looking into itself infinitely, like two mirrors, and they just literally just go infinitely in all directions. That's how unbound consciousness is experienced.
Wow, that was pretty good. I like that because now he's using the concept of infinity. This is really interesting.
When you truly disidentify from both the thinker and the thought objects.
Well, you speak so beautifully of awakening and the experience that one has when you no longer are looking so much through the lens of an ego. But since most of us are at least partly dealing with a lot of lens of ego, you mentioned earlier that you don't really have method. Then you mentioned that you help to people dissolve fixations.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I'm coming to you, I have a fixation about relationships,
Mm-hmm.
which is true. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, as does almost everybody, right?
Right. You know, and my mood will go up and down depending on how those relationships are going, etc. How would you work with somebody to help to soften or dissolve that fixation so that they have more bandwidth for awakening?
Sure. Yeah, two questions to ask that kind of got it from different ways.
Mm-hmm.
This is just coming to me now, but one would be, ask yourself, what do I want from that person? And then when the mind says, oh, I don't really want anything, go, no. What do I really want from that person? What am I expecting them to provide me? Right? Is it validation? Do I want them to tell me I'm right? Do I want them to make me feel comfortable? Do I want them to make me feel safe? And be willing to really keep asking that question. You might start feeling yourself regress even, like experientially back into childhood. Like, no, I have a map for how I interact with other people, especially when I'm emotionally connected to them. And it started with my mother and father. And now in some way, that's actually influencing how I interact with everyone I'm in emotional connection with. What is it I'm actually expecting from that person? And sometimes just asking that question over and over, it sort of reframes how you're seeing that person. You stop seeing them as some enmeshed part of yourself, and you start going, oh my God, like, why would I expect them to provide something I'm not even telling them they're supposed to provide? They're just doing their thing. They're just being themselves. And then you start like kind of loving them a little differently because you realize, oh, I was looking through them from looking at them through the lens of what I wanted from them or what I was expecting without knowing it from them. I wasn't actually seeing them. So I'm here wanting to be seen, and I'm not even seeing my partner. So questions like that can be really helpful. What do I actually want from them? Like if somebody, let's say somebody, I don't know, disrespects you. My partner said something was disrespectful. Okay, well, what am I actually looking for from them? What do I want? Well, it makes me feel uncomfortable to be disrespected. So, I'm looking for them to make me comfortable, actually. That's what I expect from that person, right? Because if an average person walks by and says something disrespectful, it might annoy you for a second, but you're going to let go of it. You're not going to think about it for weeks and months, probably, unless you have really bad coping mechanisms, perhaps. But with your partner, it's not like that, right? It's like it feels enmeshed with you, so it gets reflected in consciousness a lot more. So that's why you can actually turn that around by asking yourself, what do I actually expect from them? And am I clear on it? And have I told them that even?
So once you know that, and you know, a lot of people might know that they're psychologically sophisticated. What do you do with that?
So first of all, just seeing clearly is 95% of all of this. I've said this like many times that realization is not about getting something. It's not about getting something called enlightenment and just lucking out and finding it and putting it in your soul somewhere. It's nothing like, you don't gain anything. And it's not really about losing anything exactly. You know, you're going to have the same body. You're still going to have a functioning mind. It's actually about clear seeing. So a lot of this is just a matter of actually seeing what's really happening. And that's why I say, ask the question over and over, because you can convince yourself, I kind of know the answer and whatever. But the more you ask it, it's going to actually reframe your perceptual experience. And then you may know what to do next. So it could be something like, wow, instead of focusing so much attention on what I want from that person, what I actually feel inclined to do now is be more of a giver to that person. And you just feel freed up to express love outwardly instead of trying to get something
Get
from
something.
someone.
Uh-huh.
And then you'll spontaneously know what to do with it, with that information. Once you see clearly, the beauty of it is reality takes care of it. Life takes care of everything, because the weirdest thing about realization, liberation, and so forth is you realize, oh my God, this has been in front of my face the whole time. Nothing has been hidden from me. Nothing has been hidden from me. It was an act of smoke and mirrors in the mind. I didn't even do it to myself. There's no one to even do it. It's like it's hard to even remember what it was that was causing the perceptual distortions in a sense. It's just clarity, So a lot of times it's not a matter of what you do with it. It's a matter of seeing what's actually going on. So that's one. And number two, I would say, and this applies to like all areas of life, but just say, what am I afraid of? Right. If I feel some tension around work or the boss or a friend or my wife or husband or whatever, what am I afraid of? And feel into it and ask it again and again, over time until you really start to perceive, what am I afraid of? Talk to a trusted friend about it, like anonymously, and say, hey, can I just bounce this off of you? And sometimes just saying it out loud or writing it down, it starts to become clear. Oh my God, this is a fear of abandonment. I'm afraid that person's going to leave me, or I'm afraid they're going to fire me, or some other form of event, perhaps. So asking yourself, what am I afraid of, is really valuable.
But would it be realistic to expect that then the fear would go away? Or is it simply experiencing it without resistance?
I would say both. I think I think Rupert Spira, I heard him say once, to learn to live without fear, you have to learn to live with fear. So they end up being one and the same, where when you feel it fully without ego, it doesn't feel like you thought it did. It feels like something completely different, first of all. But also, often it does drop away. And at some point in realization, psychological fear literally drops away. It's I was talking to someone a woman today about this. She said, all of a sudden I have no fear at all. It's not like I feel brave or courageous. Like I can't feel fear. And she goes, and this is funny. She says, and it kind of made me nervous. And people say this, right? Not nervous, but concerned, because what am I going to do to protect myself and this and that, right? It's just another thought. And what I always explain is you'll realize that fear was not as intrinsic to living as you thought it was. The thoughts justify everything, right? The fear justifies itself, but psychological fear, it's completely and absolutely unnecessary. You'll still be able to respond to a threatening situation physically. You can move fast, you can get out of the way. You would be able to do that if you had to, but you can actually do that without feeling internal fear. Now, that's not at all the same as trying to repress fear or convince yourself you don't have fear. The way you get there is by going into fear again and again and again and again, and seeing so clearly what's actually happening that it just sort of disentangles itself, and you can't.
Oh, I really like that. That was, again, another point that I think was very strong and shows the importance of an integrated spirituality. So really great by Angelo. Great example to use as well about the fear aspect. A lot of people think that when we say we become fearless in spirituality, it means that, we will not fear for our lives if we're in a threatening situation. We would. The whole, the body still has its own survival mechanism. It's when we feel like Arjun did during the just before the war, and that's why Shri Krishna, kind of spoke to him so he could get out of that psychological fear and get to a place of fearlessness. So yeah, very interesting by Angelo.
You almost can't find it anymore. So that's not necessarily a goal, but it does happen in later stages of realization.
First of all, thank you for all that. Very clear and very well said. I want to ask you a different type of question, which is, you're an anesthesiologist, and I'm wondering, you might have thought about this, like, what is consciousness when you're putting people under? What are you actually doing? Are we learning about anything about what consciousness is from things like anesthesia? Is there any comments you have about that? It seems like consciousness is this big mystery, but it seems like we should know something about it with all the instruments that we currently have.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of knowledge about states of consciousness that I might define clinically, what medications affect it in what ways. it's actually a pretty complex process physiologically and neurophysiologically. There are different components. There's memory, there's the ability to self-reflect, there's the ability to keep your attention on something. There's the ability to concentrate, and there's the ability to calculate, like executive function of the mind of the forebrain. So it's a complex experience, and you can even define it by the 11 centers of the default mode network and so forth. But for anyone who's watching this, the thing I would say about this is, if you're interested in learning about that, that's no problem. That's great. But that's not how you wake up. It's learning how consciousness functions. You know, what you really want, you want to know what the experientially unbound consciousness is. That will alleviate 99% of all your curiosity about consciousness. You may still have a scientific curiosity if you're wired that way afterwards, but it'll pale in comparison to the enjoyment of actually just resting in unbound pure conscious experience. It's phenomenally.
Okay, so hi Dorian. So he kind of does believe in that boundless, formless awareness of pure consciousness. So that's good to know. Again, there's something about him. So I did look at a few of his videos prior, like on his channel, but they're not as. But I feel that this is a good preliminary, that in order to understand him from a video, from his channel, it's probably good to watch something like this to kind of understand who he is as a person and what he's expecting. For me, he's ticked a lot of the boxes of a genuine teacher so far. I've been trying to catch him out on certain things that he says, but he hasn't really said anything that I'm like, oh wait, why did you say this? Or there must be something there that's missing. If you remember, like even with Anna Brown, we had a very good beginning and it was very nice. But again, I feel like he's very pragmatic, and that may be because of his obviously his background in the medical field, and that can kind of help as well. So I think, yeah, so for me, I'm actually very impressed with everything you said, from being attached to the spiritual community, getting yourself free from that, getting beyond fear, understanding if you want to know about consciousness, that's fine, but it's not the same as waking up. I think that's very inviting. That's what I really like about it. It's inviting. And what's great is, and this does go down to Jonathan and Brian, who are the hosts of Awareness Explorers, which is a brilliant podcast. I've been listening to it for a good couple of years, and they always have something interesting to say. And I think they're allowing Angelo to express himself, and that's really good. And I think the other thing I want to say, Angelo is convinced of his message. That's the other thing, and that's an interesting thing. So far, 39 minutes in, it's been really good.
Enjoyable.
We have learned how to put people unconscious, obviously, with anesthesia. Do you think that there's any hope that technology will help us to give people more of the experience of consciousness?
Yeah, I think that they actually can do it right now with various technologies. So TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, they can find very specific brain centers, including like areas on the motor strip, and by stimulating that area, they can make you move a single finger, and it's that nuanced. From what I understand, they can even target the default mode network centers and sort of turn off the default mode network or attenuate it. And people actually do have mystical experiences with that. The experience of timelessness or the experience of separation. Shinzen Young, I don't know if you guys have interviewed him. He does work. Okay, yeah, he does work in this stuff, and I don't know a lot of detail. I think it's cool, and I think it's promising. I like any kind of modality that investigates consciousness, especially if it's done, in a thoughtful way by somebody who really has, experiential understanding of realization and so forth. That's awesome. My curiosity about it, or maybe a bit of hesitation, is just like with psychedelic drugs and so forth, those also can cause and bring about mystical experiences. In fact, at the right doses, they probably do every time. The downside or the challenge with it is not that you're hacking the system necessarily with a drug and it's like the easy way out or anything, but it's more the buy-in that when you, and in my book, I have a section in one of the early chapters called When the Other Shoe Drops. When you get a taste of expansiveness, or you get a taste of what it starts to feel like when identity is not completely solidified, ongoing, it may be expansive, it may be intimate, it may be a sense of universal love, more real than real. When you get those tastes, it's typically followed by some emotional material that was repressed coming to the surface. And that can be really uncomfortable. And if you don't know what to do with it, and you're not willing to do something with it, like work with it, do inquiry, do emotional integration, various things. If you're not interested in that, sometimes what you'll do is to kind of dodge it, is just take the next dose of something, and not realize that there is a natural process to this. There's an ebb and flow to it. And it's not all just about blowing yourself out into mystical experiences over and over and over. Because you really do have to come back, and, Adyashanti talks about it more sequentially, like the up and out and the down and in. And there is, for sure, in the realization process, there's a massive up and out, which is, we call maybe the first part of awakening. And then the shadow work that follows is sort of the down and in. But even in the more micro way of speaking, it even happens with experiences. Like, you'll have an experience of expansion and then an experience of contraction. And that's when it's time to do some emotion work and shadow work. So knowing that there's this sort of natural cadence to this, and trusting it, and having the buy-in to go into all parts of it, instead of just looking for a way to have the good without the bad. That's how realization propagates. So I think these modalities are really cool. And I think they probably will have a place, and they're neat. And often what the place is to give you the first taste. Some people are so mind identified, they buy so much into their own thoughts that simple inquiry makes no sense. Who am I? It doesn't even make sense to me. I know who I am. I know where I was born and my age, and right. But you give them some, I don't know, DMT or something, or mushrooms, let's say, and all of a sudden it just blows them out, and they're like, oh, that's okay. So it gives them a taste, and it shows them that there really is something beyond the very limited dimension of the human psyche when it's constrained by cognitive processes. So I think that may be the value of those kinds of modalities. But I do believe through TMS and some other different modalities where they can go through the skull and literally like affect the brain centers, it's quite possible to hack some experiences, some mystical experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the sort of natural process that you talked about, actually, going into my own personal experience with reading your book, I was faced with a kind of a dilemma. And, in my experience, the less that I'm focused on a future event like awakening or enlightenment, the more present I am, then the more peaceful and happy. And yet I'm fascinated by the idea of totally being through the illusion of the separate self completely, the idea of no self. But I'm a little wary of making my life about something I don't yet have. When I'm not worried about it, I'm filled with joy when I just simply rest as pure awareness, which seems to me it's already and always here. So it's like an in-between dilemma. Have you? Yeah.
So as I describe in the book, there's the sweet spot between practice and intention. So I'm sorry, between intention and surrender. Excuse me. You could say that this whole process, which does not happen like as I describe in my book, my chapter on paradox. I'm talking about awakening as an event in the future. It's not an event in the future. There's no event. There's no future. It happens now, and it can only happen now, and everything is already happening now. Everything that could have happened is already happening right now. All events simultaneously exist. It's just a matter of conditions which is expressed. So So awakening is very much the same way, and it's in that category. So you could say this whole processless process really it's a fluctuation between that intention and surrender. There are times when surrender is what's next, and there are times when someone is a little too surrendered, meaning they want to stay a little unconscious. They don't actually want to look and see the degree of their suffering or the degree of suffering they may be causing someone else, right? We've all been there. At other times, we're fixating too much on some kind of goal. We're turning it into a mental goal. This isn't a mental thing. There's no future in which it's going to happen. Inquiry happens now, and the purpose of inquiry is to dig deeper into what now is until you go right to the bottom of it.
Everything so far has been really interesting. The last point says we're making, again, very interesting about intention and surrender, and having, kind of seeing what more or less to do. Also, I like the fact that he talked about, if someone is really heady and into their thoughts, maybe for them, the intake of chemicals can help them. So that's, again, a very interesting take. And again, these show quite a mature teacher. I don't know if he considers himself a teacher, but as a spiritual teacher, these are good signs that we can see in someone. Yes, Martin, you're right. In a split of a second, that's what we see. So far, I think with Angelo, we're seeing something really authentic, something really great. I do really like what he said about surrender. Like, sometimes being surrendered too much, you can't be. Sometimes you have to have the intention to do something. You have to balance it out. So I really like that idea.
So yeah, I tried in the book to kind of balance that out and sort of explain that there is a paradox with this for sure, and that is that you could argue, anyone who's seen sort of Neo-Advaita teachings videos, like Tony Parsons was probably the first, one who spoke in this way, the open secret message. Very good if you haven't seen him. Then Jim Newman, and there's a bunch more.
I don't know. He said he likes Tony Parsons. Maybe that's where I'm kind of a bit now wary of him. But let's see. I'm not going to judge him yet. And he mentioned Jim Newman. Oh, gosh. Yeah, let me take that back a bit. Martin, this is getting dangerous.
Dig deeper into what now is until you go right to the bottom of it. So yeah, I tried in the book to kind of balance that out and sort of explain that there is a paradox with this for sure, and that is that you could argue, anyone who's seen sort of Neo-Advaita teachings videos, like Tony Parsons was probably the first, one who spoke in this way, the open secret message. Very good if you haven't seen him. Then Jim Newman, and there's a bunch more. A similar way, and that is the seeker, the sense of being a seeker is already illusory. So why encourage the seeker? But even there's not even anyone who can do that. There's no one who can encourage a seeker or discourage a seeker. It doesn't really matter. You may wake up, you may not. There may be enlightenment, there may not. But that's not even going to happen to anyone, right? So that's kind of that message. But it's a powerful transmission in the moment. But if you internalize that and believe it's telling you, oh, there's nothing I can do, there's no reason to inquire, there's no emotion work to do, that in my opinion is a mistake, because I know
he's redeemed himself. Yeah, that was a redeeming factor. Okay, I think we've always said this, even with ego advaita or pseudo non-duality, that yes, it's, the message isn't wrong. It's just that practically it makes no sense and is not concrete enough. So yeah, it's things so far, and a good take. No, Martin, I think he's redeemed himself. I think what he's trying to do is be nice to Tony and not irritate him, because Tony's already irritated.
Pretty much from personal evidence that there are people who speak that way who did a ton of work themselves. They were intense spiritual seekers for years.
Yes, exactly. These fools that now say there's no seeking have done a lot of it. So, yeah, I mean, I like the fact that he's called them out, really. Yeah, that's really good that he's called them out.
There's no emotion work to do. That in my opinion is a mistake, because I know pretty much from personal evidence that there are people who speak that way who did a ton of work themselves. They were intense spiritual seekers for years. They gave their whole life to that, right? So this stuff is all paradoxical. Again, what I go back to when I'm working directly with somebody is a matter of fixation.
Okay. I guess I understand what he means by the paradox. So what he's trying to say is that the paradox is this, that at the end you realize that awareness doesn't really seek awareness. Awareness doesn't search for awareness. Awareness cannot be found in a book, in a teaching, in a pointing. But that's awareness itself. But there is a relative reality, a relative existence that has to catch up to that awareness. And it's that relative reality that has to then start integrating into that awareness. And that's the paradox, I guess, where there is separation on the relative level, but actually there's always been a oneness, always been a union. So, um, so yeah, I think that's what he's pointing to. Or if not, I've just added on to what he's kind of saying. Tony wants his book sales going. Yeah, definitely. The Open Secret. I'll never read that book. And yeah, Angela's being probably nice, I think. His probably personal view probably isn't that positive of pseudo non-duality, from what I think.
If I feel them fixating in this sense of doership, I'm going to help them undermine that right now. If I feel them fixating in a way that they're going avoidant, oh, there's nothing to do, there's no one, there's nothing to look at, and yet what I feel in them is a massive amount of suffering coming to the surface, and they don't want to feel it. And I go, well, let's find out let's look into what you're feeling, right? And so again, we can fixate in any way, and we can fixate in the masculine, and we can fixate in the feminine, energetically. So Zen's a great example of what we're talking, this paradox of spirituality we're talking about, in that you would think Zen is, it's one thing, it's one sort of sect of Buddhism. But when you look at Japanese Zen, it's actually two quite different, in a sense, approaches. There's Soto Zen, and Soto Zen is, based on sort of the way Dogen taught, which was, there's nothing to strive for. You're already Buddha nature. Just sit there and realize it. That's it. There's nothing more to it, right? And Renzai is like, well, fat lot of good it does you to believe you're a Buddha when you're suffering, when you're not in direct contact with your Buddha nature. So why don't you work really hard to get to that first awakening and wake up and open the gate, open the door, get through the first, gateless barrier, and then you're more in a place where you can really start to allow the spontaneous unfolding of spirituality to and so forth.
Yeah, just realize your Buddha nature.
Now, again, because of the paradoxes, there's a lot that's actually similar between Soto and Renzai, but the thrust of practice is quite different, actually, especially initially. So again, paradox, and the beauty of it is, in a way, you kind of have to find your own way with this. You have to learn to sense into when you might be fixating a little too much in non-doing, or when you might be, on the other side of things, like really overthinking it, trying to force something to happen through the way you're thinking about it, through the way you're applying a paradigm to the world.
So I think Angelo is really interesting in the sense that I think what he's trying to say, and so his approach is simply that we have to work on your spirituality individually and see what is actually restricting you from growing, and what's not allowing you to be your true self, and how can we get to that. I think I think that's also a good sign of a teacher as well, is when they're able to personally work with you on that. So that's a good point to Angela.
Is that helpful?
It is. Yeah, it's quite helpful.
What advice would you have for people in meditation? You mentioned that you like Adyashantis a lot, but should people be doing different types of meditation depending upon where they are, or is there one type that you think, well, that's going to be helpful for everyone?
Yeah, I think one type that it would be helpful for everyone if they resonate with it, if they can do it yet, would
Or
be
not do
natural.
it.
What I describe natural meditation, or not do it. What I would describe as natural meditation, or in Soto Zen would be called shikantaza. And it's essentially not modulating your experience in any way. You're not defining your experience. You have no goal. What you're not doing is distracting yourself. So you're sitting quietly with your eyes closed. You're not playing with your phone. You're not purposely going down thought roads. But beyond that, beyond just eliminating distractions, there's no specific goal. You're not trying to, there's no right or wrong way to do it. You're not trying to direct your attention in any specific sense gate. You're not trying to relax specifically. I write about this in the book, and Adyashanti, I think, has a different version of, or not a different, probably very similar version of it. I think he calls it basic meditation or
True
simple.
meditation. He calls it true meditation.
True meditation, yeah. And someone told, when I wrote my chapter on natural meditation, someone said, "Hey, that's Adyashanti's true meditation." So I went and looked at it, and I said, "Oh, it's quite similar." And then I thought, well, I mean, we're both from Zen backgrounds, so for me, it was interesting because I had heard about shikantaza, but I still somehow perceived it was a technique. Somehow, I guess I didn't really feel into it, but it hit me one day. And I didn't even think, oh, this is shikantaza. Just suddenly, while meditating, it was very obvious there was no need for any technique at all. In fact, natural meditation was just the most simple thing in the world, and it's essentially always happening. And that's how it struck me. So that type of meditation, that approach to meditation, if somebody vibes with it, I think is certainly valuable to anyone. And I often recommend it, even when someone's, say, going through later stages of realization and doing a very specific inquiry into the sense fields, looking into the subject-object construct, or the formless nature of objects and so forth. Even when they're doing those kinds of pointed inquiries, I often tell them, I would alternate that with natural meditation. Take some time to just do nothing, even a week or 2 weeks. There's no need to overly direct your attention. Now, I'll tie that into the question you asked as well. And that is, again, a paradoxical thing, but specific to this one-pointed approach I sometimes talk about with approaching the first awakening, where you hone your attention down into something. It can be anything, a focus of attention, a focus of inquiry that's so tight that there's like nothing else but that. It becomes a very singular experience. So in Zen, it would be called, what is mu? It's the first koan you usually get, mu. Or the question, who am I? Until it just becomes who. Just until that question is so absorbing that there's nothing apart from it at all anymore. That's a one-pointed approach. And it does feel like an intense focus. You could say it feels like seeking. But here's the deal. Seeking is already happening. The mind is endlessly seeking. But it's kind of, for the typical mind-identified person, it's kind of like dilated out into all these different directions. Maybe one or two, but for the most part, the mind's kind of going in different directions all day long and so forth. When there's something magical that happens when you hone it down into this one-pointed approach and specifically use a question or a focus that cannot be answered cognitively, cannot be answered logically. Magic does happen. It goes from feeling like a massive amount of exertion or effort sometimes to like this thing that's alive and doing it. It's like it's itself. It's inquiring itself. Mu is
Like
mooing mu. Who is asking who. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and that's
Well, I'm wondering what questions would fit that description. Obviously, who am I would be one of them. Are there other questions you work with?
What is mu is a good one. Now, having a little background understanding that Mu is not there's a story behind it, but the story doesn't matter. Mu is beautiful because it gives the mind nothing to grab onto. Not that you can't put the first thought around Mu because it makes no sense, right? And yet you trust that there's an answer because so many Zen practitioners over the last hundreds of years have woken up contemplating this koan, right? So what is Mu becomes it's very interesting. It starts out by feeling maybe distasteful and solid and like opaque. And over time, it starts to feel different. Like, oh my God, no, there's something here. There's some. My Zen teacher just keeps telling me, no, don't explain Mu to me. I want you to be so infused with Mu, just become so one with Mu that there's only Mu. That's the whole key. And when you're actually able to do that, often that's when the shift occurs. Magic happens, and it's a trip. I mean, it's like, wow, oh, whoa, I did not expect that at all. It's always unexpected. And so what is Mu?
Interesting. I like the fact that he has two approaches, the one being the one pointed, and then the other one being the natural meditation. Very interesting. Yeah, I don't think I want to add anything more yet. I don't know how I feel about his comment about seeking. That the mind is endlessly seeking. I think there can be an end to the seeking within the mind when we are able to strengthen that intellect. But he may not want to touch on that because he doesn't really need to in this conversation, in my opinion. But it's something to think about. But yeah, Mu, are you Mu? I was thinking about Muji when you were saying that. So it's, but yeah, the other thing, he could have explained what the koan was. I don't think he said what the koan was. Or if that is the koan, what is Mu? Then I don't know. But yeah, I felt like he could have explained it.
There are other ones in Zen I think that are good, like, what is my original face? What is my face before I was born? What is my face before my parents were born? Right? It binds the mind up in this funny way. And that's the key with a koan, especially a first koan, is to bind up the mind, and yet some form of inquiry goes beyond that binding. Something can keep going beyond it, and you feel it. And again, at first it feels opaque, feels like silly. The mind will keep putting up thoughts going, this doesn't make sense. I don't know if I'm doing it right. And then, your teacher will just say, hey, those are thoughts. Keep asking. Yeah. And you will go beyond those thoughts. Yeah. And it becomes instinctual.
Yeah. It's so similar to well, first of all, I just have to say that when just now, when I asked what is Mu, I started laughing uncontrollably, and I have no idea why.
There you go.
Second of all, very similar, and I've talked about this on the program before. One of my very first tastes, I was watching Gangaji talk about Papaji, her teacher, and he said, what if you had no intention?
Mm-hmm.
And at first I just laughed, because isn't deciding to have no intention an intention? But then something relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so glad to hear you talk about inquiry, and I guess, Adyashanti's true meditation is two parts: you allowing everything to be as it is, and asking the question, who or what is experience, or who am I, or whatever inquiry questions. That it seems to me that they go together. If you sit down to do inquiry with the idea that you're going to either get rid of whatever you're feeling now, or bring about something that you don't have, it's bound to fail. It's like guaranteed. And so if you do them both, it seems to me that's, or maybe you have to sort of alternate between, natural meditation, just allowing, just being with whatever it is, and then focusing on inquiry. I don't know whether you need to alternate, or you can do them at the same time, or you have to feel into it.
I would say feel into it and try different things. But if with something like this, we're doing such subtle work, I would say try it for a week or two before you change it to something else, right? Or you'll just end up
That's
thinking
sound
about it. So
advice.
I'd say give it some time to just settle in and see how it works. But yeah, that's part of the interesting thing about this is you can't wake yourself up. You, as you take yourself to be, can't wake yourself up. Awakening definitely happens. Something's operating there, and it's driving this whole process.
See, that's what I like about him, is that's where he's different to the pseudo non-dualist completely. Um, he acknowledges there is something, um, you know, and I feel that's grace. I feel that's grace that moves us. But yeah, it's interesting.
That question was beautiful that Papaji put to Gangaji that you mentioned. What if you had no intention?
Mm.
And I like how you said, well, isn't having no intention an intention? And I would say it this way: you, as you take yourself to be, actually can't have no intention, but it doesn't mean that there's not something here that has no intention. What is
Mm.
that? Can you
Beautiful.
feel it? Can you feel it? Right? Is it right? It's just
Mm.
right there,
Yes.
right here.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the beauty of this stuff.
Well, Brian's awesome.
Inquiry is fascinating. It's beautiful. I'm sure you've heard me say, I think I said it somewhere, that inquiry really is the key to this stuff. It's not a certain meditation technique that's the key. It's not having the right teacher, although a truly realized teacher can be very, very valuable. The key is at some point being willing to do inquiry full on with full force, willing to let go into where it's pointing you, and being authentic about it. That's what wakes people up, whatever form it comes in. People stumble on it on their own. Eckhart Tolle described it at the beginning of his book. I just asked the question, well, if I can't live with myself, wait a minute, is there one of me or is there two of me, right? Asking the right question at the right time with the right amount of suffering behind it, and letting that inquiry burn deep into beyond layers of identity. That's what awakening is. That's what causes it. I can't even tell you what awakening is still. It's alive right now. It's right here. It's every sound we're hearing. It just is. It's not something that happens to someone. There aren't people who have it and people who don't. What we're talking about, awake nature, it's literally everything we're feeling and experiencing, and it's nothing at all. And how one seeming individual comes full on into synchronicity with that is a bit of a mystery, but it definitely happens. And opening yourself to the possibility and being willing to go through whatever you have to go through is huge. An intention like that is powerful.
You speak so eloquently on these things, Angelo. I really appreciate it. I had never heard a definition of inquiry quite like yours, which I really like, which is digging deeper into what is happening now. And that's a very nice, simple definition, and yet it leads to so many different ways to do that. And I really appreciate your thoughts about that. We want you to guide a meditation for our listeners.
Right, so we're 1 hour in. We won't do the guided meditation. We'll do what we'll do now is open the door, or open the room. Sorry, open the room to any questions, any comments of what we thought and seen so far. I think everything that was shared by Angelo was good. It was insightful. I hardly had to stop, which was interesting to say the least. I felt that everything that he was saying was touching a deeper spiritual point. I wanted to kind of know what his book was, because I think it's a book that should be checked out. So his book is Awake, It's Your Turn. So so that's one to look out for. and it's an interesting one. So, um, so yeah, so yeah, what were your thoughts on this? Do check out the podcast itself, Awareness Explorers. It's really, really good. It's a really great podcast that I enjoy but listening. Watched it for the first time today. Mainly, I was listening to it on my app. Um, and I support them on Patreon because with podcasts like these, they deserve our support. So I do support them on Patreon as well. Um, and just generally, they are pretty nice people, Brian and Jonathan. So uh, they're really humble, down to earth, um, always willing to learn. So yeah, I'd like to know what your views are on um, Angelo. I think I like him. I'll say he's a genuine teacher. Um, from that interview, I think he does need to refine himself in terms of the pitfalls of Neo Advaita. Although I think he kind of touches it, but I think he could have done a better job. Um, Other than that, um, I think everything you said was great. I really liked the things he gave, certain modalities that can be used to uh, create mystical experiences that didn't require chemicals, just by touching certain centers in the brain. I think that's very interesting. I would like to know more about that. Um, so yeah, that was cool. Um, yeah. Um, he talked about at one point there was something about the non-seriousness of spirituality. Um, that really, when people are looking into spirituality, they become very serious, and they become very rigid, and they become so what's the nice word, um they just become so absorbed into their own world. And I think that's dangerous when that happens, when we become so absorbed into our own world, and we become so kind of fixated on um, becoming really serious. The thing about spirituality is that the more at ease we are, the more joyful it is, the more comfortable we are. Um, but then going back to what Angelo said, even in that comfort, there may be a point when you feel discomfort, when you get uncomfortable, when you have to face your fears, your desires, the senses, and its majestic information download. You will have to face your vasanas, you will have to face your conditionings, your karma, your own dharma, your own swadharma, your own talents and abilities, your habits, your reactions to things. So there is that as well that will occur. But even then, I would say there's a lot of importance of doing spirituality with a smile and being at ease more than anything. I think also one thing I liked about what Angelo said was finding the teacher that will be able to help you. I think that's really important, and really something we have to think about is that, are we going towards teachers that are helping us and guiding us and taking us further, or are we going towards teachers that are not really helping us, not really benefiting us in any way? So I think that's something we do need to think about. And I'm looking forward to looking at his book, which I'll probably read eventually. I have a whole list to do. I'm still reading this book on Swami Vivekananda. Um, so yeah, um, so hi Rakeshi, nice to see you. Nice to see you, TikTok Panditji. So yes, so a lot that has been discussed here. A lot that has. I wish you did talk a bit more about, and I think it's hard when you do a podcast, I guess, to go into the experience of oneness. And I think we also didn't do the guided meditation, so I won't hold that against him. But even when someone's talking, you want there to be somewhere where we are feeling that presence of oneness and formlessness. Sometimes you want to feel that. And I think with Angelo, I felt that he could have done it. And that's sometimes why I get so disappointed, is that some teachers can really get you there and yet they choose not to. Maybe he didn't feel it was needed. So that's not knocking him, by the way. That's just one of my preferences rather than anything else. Thank you for being here, brother. Thank you. So yeah, and the most important thing, and why I say experiencing oneness or the formless is so important, is because that's what will always remain with you after you've listened to something, after you've absorbed something, after you've left a podcast episode. It's not that. So let me just give you an example of when I go through my podcast episodes. Like I record them, and I record them knowing that eventually someone's got to be feeling what I'm talking about, and that everything I'm talking about, that they know is come from the core of my heart rather than something from book knowledge or from somewhere I've read, but actually it's more of my internalization of it and then thinking about how to make it practical. So I think it's really important that that's done. And yeah, so really that's one of those things. But yeah, well, I think that's it for today. It's been a good session. I've really enjoyed it. It was nice to actually do a reaction video with two of my favorite, well, one of my favorite podcasts, and the fact that they had a guest that I wanted to explore, and they ended up exploring that explorer of awareness, and that was good. When you can have, because it can go either way. You could have an interview where it can go horribly wrong, and it's nice to see that this didn't go wrong at all. So that was very nice. So yeah, apart from that, I will probably try and come on again, do another live and see what to do, and probably just have a general chat. But or just, there's a lot of videos I need to react to. So but if you have any more that you want me to react to, just send them over. And other than that, do take care. I'm really sorry about the hiccup in the beginning with the time and with the fact that there was an issue with the restream. So I'm gonna have to see what's going on. So apologies for that. But yeah, anyway, take care, everybody. Stay safe, and I shall see you again very soon. Bye.